big of you. We're going to start Guitoberfest 2021 and welcome everyone here at the Academy, and also welcome to everyone watching on YouTube. Our first presentation is from Nicoletta Todesco and Dave Belcher, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I guess I kick it off, don't I? Welcome to everyone out there. Our talk tonight is called In Tune Together, and we're going to give you some tips on effective duo practice. And that title, In Tune with One Another, is meant to be a play on words. There are many different aspects to being in sync, in tune with one another as a duo. But the first thing that's actually really important, which might seem obvious, is actually being in tune with one another. So in pitch is what I mean. So just before we get started, I'd like to talk a little bit about tuning. Because as a duo, before you start, it's probably the most important thing that you'll do in addition to preparing for a performance together. So obviously your guitars may be in tune by themselves, but they might be out of tune from one another. And so when you begin tuning, you need to have a common reference point, which means one of two different things. When you begin tuning, you can both have electronic tuners that you tune from, so long as you have the same frequency. So make sure that you're both tuning to A equals 440 hertz or whatever you've agreed on. That's one method, is to use a tuner. The only issue with the tuners is they're not pinpoint accurate. There can be a little variation, and that little variation in tuning can expand over the course of time while you're playing. So maybe you're only a little bit out when you start, but then you have humidity, sweat from your hands, the temperature in the room. All of those things can throw your guitar even just a little bit more out of tune, so much so that you notice it, and that's where it becomes an issue. So that's a downside to tuning with a tuner. The other way you could go is to have one person play a reference pitch, say the open first string, open E string, and then you tune to that pitch, and then tune your guitar, and the partner will also tune to that same pitch. So you have a common reference point you're both tuning to. But even then, we're all human, we're fallible, we make mistakes. You might be just slightly out of tune from one another. And so the second thing about tuning, which is really important, in addition to having a common reference point, so before you get started, is to check against one another to make sure that you're in tune with one another. One of the things we're going to talk a lot about tonight in our talk is the fact that when you play with a duet partner or in any ensemble situation, you have to lose a little bit of your individuality, or at least you gain a more social relationship with your partner or partners in crime. So it's really important that you're in tune with one another and not just in tune by yourself. So you have to have a little bit of checking against. Before you get started, take the time to make sure that you've checked that your E is pretty close or matching your partner's E. One other thing I would recommend, though, is before you begin performing, play a chord in the key of the piece that you're about to play, and then both of you tune off of the pitches within that key to really kind of sync up with that key, because you might have some on the guitar with equal temperament. There are some pitches that are always going to be a little off from one another, but if you tune in the key, you'll generally be a little happier together when you play that particular piece. And then finally, if you have a piece that has scordatura, that is a different tuning. For instance, really common in duo literature is one part or both parts tuning the sixth string down to D. If you're in a situation where the first piece on your program or in your performance, or maybe it's the only piece you perform, has that tuning, then make sure you've given that string plenty of time to settle into pitch. Because as soon as you start tuning that peg down, it immediately wants to creep back up to the pitch that it just came from. And it will have that tendency while you're playing. So you have to be really diligent to give some time to let the pitch sit low before you tune it back up to pitch. So if you are playing a piece in your performance that comes next that's in that tuning, then when you're finished with your first piece, before you go to this next piece that's in D tuning. As soon as you're done, while you're standing up to give your bow to the audience, go ahead and start tuning that peg down 6 times. Give it a full 6 turns. And you can just take your time, being grateful for the audience's gratitude toward you. And then when you sit down, tune all of the other strings before you touch that 6th string. Get those really nice and clean. And now your 6th string has sat long enough that when you tune it, the 2 to 3, maybe even 3.5 turns that it needs to get back up to D, it will stay there. Make sure you're in tune together. That's an essential aspect of duo playing. And I'll pass it on to Nikki now.
Thank you, Dave. That was a good start. I really like the focus on tuning, because today that we're talking about effective duo practice, but sometimes we forget the fundamentals like that. Like, we are perfect players, so good, we know the part so well, but then we forgot to tune well. That's going to make our performance less effective because of that. So I really like to stop and have a check-in before that. So the next topic we want to talk about, because we're going to address different elements that you might want to think about or to start strategizing or including in your practice time together with your duo partner for an effective duo playing, is actually the metronome. That's the word that everyone hates. I know. Metronome doesn't sound fun, but it's so helpful. It needs to be our best friend in playing, but it needs to be our best friend even in playing together. And metronome, what I mean by that, because metronome is used for a lot of things, but what I think is very fundamental when we play together with our duo partner is actually to feel the beat together. So one of the things that we often miss is to feel the beat together. We know the tempo, we're fine, we can play the part alone, but then when we're together with the partner, something is off. And most of the time is because we don't have this same way to actually feel the pulse. And there are some exercises that are fun to do with in duo, like in duo practice as well, that are using the metronome. And what I really like, I'm gonna turn on my metronome. It's just my metronome on the phone, nothing fancy, nothing special, but it will do just fine. Like, for example, a good exercise that you might want to do to tune in with your duo partner from a rhythmical perspective is, for example, tap or snap. Is this snap? Yes, that's the word. Together with the beat. Can you do that? Sometimes we are just a tiny bit off. We are in time, but just a little off. So if I start maybe a little slower, let's do 60. And we start thinking about snapping together. Ba, ba, ba. Can you blend together with your movements? Blending with the movements together is so important. And that could be something like snapping or tapping as well, before even playing the guitar. I think that's very important to start feeling the beat together, but not just hearing the beat in your head, feeling it in your body, because that will help you also to match articulation, to match the movements while you're playing with your duo partner. So I think that that's very important. And if you want to have more fun, you can even start to tap subdivisions, for example. Let's say we have the same exact beat, but one will tap on the down beat and the other one on the up beat. So you will have, for example, that, sorry, that, beat, that, that, beat, that, beat, that, beat. Yeah, I'm trying to do 2 people in one, but you get the idea of like one taps on the downbeat and the other takes off on the upbeat. And it's important to start building that synchronization with your dual partner. But that's the fun part before, to just get rhythmically in tune. I love this. I'm gonna say in tune so many times today. I just like it. It has such a broad meaning that it serves so well what we're trying to convey today. But once you do that, yeah, with your body, whatever you want to do, clapping, whatever you feel it's going to be helpful, you can do it on the guitar. So let's say same exercise, but you play a note. So together, bam, 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 and just you play repeatedly a note together. So you start to match articulation, you start to match even sound if you wish. If you are particularly good at this exercise, start matching sounds, start building up different ideas of articulations and play them together with the metronome so you can feel the pulse together. Next exercise that you can do if you feel bored because you're too good, well, you can do the same, like one plays the down bit and one will play the up bit with playing a note, for example, da, di, da, di, da. And you need to be together with the metronome. If that's not enough, you want more, you can even work on smaller subdivisions together. And again, this is just to feel the beat, feel the pulse together. If you do this practice in duo together, it's going to be very, very effective because you gain a rhythmical awareness altogether as a duo. And I think that's very, very important. And it will help so much your duo playing as well. And then, of course, you can be creative and imagine so many exercises similar to this one, and everything will serve just to make your duo playing more beautiful and more synchronized and feeling the same pulse together. So this is what I wanted to say about metronome and rhythm, but I'll pass the ball to Dave, because from here he will take off and he will start another topic, which is very important.
Great, thanks, Nikki. So I before we started streaming on YouTube, we had a little chat session with Academy members about who their favorite duos are and why they're their favorite duos. And one of the comments I'm looking at here at the bottom says, "It sounds beautiful when both guitars are in sync." And the reason the Assad duo is my favorite duo is because it seems like they're just one instrument. They, like someone said, they finish one another's thoughts. And it's crazy because they're so good at dynamics, articulation. They're so good at even slowing down together. It seems like they just have one mind. And so I want to work on how we can begin to do the same kind of thing in our duo playing. And I want to give you a simple set of exercises. So I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. But first, I want to mention you may not have practiced technique with your duo partner before. Anyone who's come to the summer school and played in the orchestra or in the ensembles know we always do technique practice before we begin the music part. And it's a great way to get in sync with one another and to really work out the kinds of things that you'll be doing in the music. Technique practice is like, this is the way I like to think about it at least, a controlled laboratory where you can explore all sorts of different elements in a safe way. So it also helps to work on technical elements in isolation so that you're not baking in any of those explorations into the music through repetition. Maybe we try articulation one way one day, but then the next day we try it a different way. And the more we repeat that, it becomes kind of baked into the music. And then if you change your mind later, it becomes a habit you have to unlearn. So technique practice, isolating these elements can be really, really helpful for developing your musical skills as a duo partner. So I'm going to give you a very simple exercise that we can all do together. So since everyone's muted, this should work theoretically. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see this sheet All right, so this is also available on our resources page for Academy members. This is really a simple C major scale, 1 octave. Now, I want to give just a couple of small comments before we begin here. I'm going to play the whole scale on exercise 1, and I want you to listen. That's really important, just like you would listen to your duo partner. You have to listen. That's really key here. But when you get to these fermatas, you'll notice there are 2 fermatas, these bird's eye symbols right here above the C's, at the middle and at the end. Those will be cues. When I get to that C, we're all going to pause there, and then I'll give you a nod to come back in on the next one. So I'll play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll pause, and I'll give you a nod, 1. And so right on that down nod, we'll come in together. And then at the end, I'm going to land on that C, and I'll play that, and we'll pause on the C, and then I'll give you the nod again to mute your sound. It's really important that you come in together, but also that you silence the notes together. So I'll play through the scale really nice and slowly once. And what I'd like you to do here is listen to legato. Listen to how smooth the notes connect or not, if I'm not playing particularly well today. The volume of the notes, the tone, if it's ponticello or tasto, and I'd like you to try to match what I do when we play it the second time, okay? So I'll play through this once, really nice and slowly. Okay, now we're going to try it together just once. You only get 1 shot at this. We have a limited time here, so I'll give you a full count, so 4 beats, and we'll come in together on 1. 1, 2, ready, play. Okay, hopefully you were with me there. I made a little mistake the first time through, and so maybe you were expecting the mistake the second time too. But notice those cues. They're really important because it gives you a chance to make sure that visually you know when to come in with your partner. The more you do this kind of practice together, practicing technique in isolation, the more you won't even need those cues at some point. Now, we're going to step it up. We're going to do the same thing, but this time with articulation. So again, I'll play it 1 time through. You'll notice there's staccato on some of these notes. The other notes should be played legato. Okay, so if there's no dot below the note, then play that legato that is smooth and connected, and the other notes short. But I want you, again, to listen to how short I play the staccato, because we can vary that, right? That's one of the choices we make in our musical interpretation. So I'll play it through once. Okay, and if you've been with Janet, she might be doing this at the orchestra during summer school, saying, "Don't cut that note off until I give you the cue." Great job. Okay, now one more step up this time, and this is much more challenging to do actually. This is very similar to ritardando, which we're not going to do here together, but I want you to do with your duo partner at home. We're going to do dynamics. So as best I can, I'm going to play getting louder from piano up to forte, so starting nice and soft and then getting to loud, and then coming back down, starting loud and getting soft to piano. I'll play it through one more time. 1, 2, ready, play. Okay, now it's your turn. I'll try to keep that consistent. So we'll do it one more time. Piano to forte, forte to piano, and make sure you're listening and watching. 1, 2, ready, play. All right, great. So I hope you stuck with me through that. This is an excellent way to practice together. I think it's actually an underrated way to practice together as a duo. And of course, you can shape this in all kinds of ways. This is linked very closely to what Nikki was talking about with rhythm. So you can start to bring in some rhythmic subdivisions and rhythmic practice like dotted rhythm practice, along with scales, arpeggios, lots of different things you can do here. So I hope you enjoy that in your duo practice together.
Thank you, Dave. That was wonderful. I love that exercise. and I have to be honest, I've done that in the past with duo partners, like as an exercising scales together. So I think it's very, very helpful. And thank you for that. So now you have some good exercises and to do with your duo partner, but that's more to it. We'll get into more fun, at least for me, because we're going to talk about phrasing. That's a word that we use a lot, but sometimes it's hard to understand what we have to do with phrasing. And I think that phrasing together in a duo, it's very, very important. Like, it's super important to be able to phrase together. But how do you do that? Actually, I was lucky enough to work with a lot of people in duos, trios, but especially duos, with people that are not guitarists. And actually, I have to say that they taught me so much about duo playing that I can also apply to the guitar. And for example, I worked a lot with flutists and singers. And what I learned from them is that their phrasing is so tied to their breathing a lot. So basically, it's like they are communicating and they are saying a musical phrase through their breath. So there is an amount of breathing that goes from the beginning to the end of a phrase, and there they take a breath. We guitarists, we hardly breathe. So I encourage you to start thinking about breathing while you're playing, because we don't produce our sounds with our breath. So we don't think it's important, but it's actually super important. But what that communicated to me is actually that there is something I can learn from wind instruments or from singers about phrasing. And actually, if we look at the word phrasing, the actual word, it comes from writing and speech. Like a phrase, it's like a sentence, like when you have to deliver a speech, you need to think about how you deliver that speech, how you say that sentence, where do you start putting emphasis on, where do you pause? We cannot talk like plain and without putting periods in our speech, without breathing, without taking a break, because we're not convincing. Like the person who's listening to us is not understanding. So there's a lot that we can take from the speech itself about phrasing in music. And what I think it's very hard is to think about the guitar as if it was not a guitar, because we have a plucking instrument. So no matter what, we're going to hear that plucking rhythmical sound of the guitar that sometimes doesn't help with connecting notes together into a musical phrase. So what I really like to do is thinking about the guitar as if it was not a guitar. Then I play the guitar, and that's the most beautiful instrument in the world. I should say that now that we are on YouTube. But it's good to think about it as if it wasn't with strings. So we can think about it more vocally, and that will help our phrasing. So I'm going to do a very silly exercise with you. Like, forgive me, but we're going to do something very silly right now. I'm going to share as well my document. I hope you see it fine. So there it is. There is our document. There are some interesting things written on it, but we're going to do an exercise together. One thing that I found very, very useful in learning how to phrase is actually to start thinking about it in a more vocal and with actual phrases in it. You know, depending on how you phrase a line, it will change the way you hear that line, and it will change what it says to the audience. So one really fun thing is put some words on your phrases. I know it's silly. You might have better phrases that I have, but I'm going to try with you this little exercise. We have a duet here. Super simple, just in thirds, super easy. Your part is only this part on the upper voice, which is E, F, G, F, E. And there is a daughter rhythm. That's the most difficult part. If you haven't done daughter rhythms yet, like, just try to learn it with us. So basically what we're going to play is like E, F, F, G, F, E. Super easy. Maybe even a little slower, like E, F, F, G, F, E. Now, if we think of these as if it wasn't a phrase, just a musical phrase with notes, we could put some words to it. For example, I love Guitoberfest, because who doesn't love Guitoberfest? And if we think about how I love Guitoberfest sounds, it sounds, I love Guitoberfest. There's a lot of T's there. So it might suggest a little bit of a detached feeling to this phrase, Guitoberfest. We have a little bit of T's, and so it might sound a little bit more staccato that we would do in other ways. So if I think about I love Guitoberfest while I'm playing that line, I might play the line in a certain way or in another. So for example, I love Guitoberfest. And also I love, so it's also a little bit declamatory. I'm saying something really, really powerful. Why don't we play that together? I play the second part so we hear a little duet. You hear it. I don't hear anything. I just hear myself, but we can do that. And I want you to think, do not say that out loud, but I want you to think, I love Guitoberfest while you're playing that with me. So 1 in, 2 in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what if we change the phrase in this little phrase, musical phrase? For example, this, why are you singing now? I feel like this has more sweeter sounds to it. Why are you singing now? And I feel this might trigger a little bit more legato in this ending. So why are you singing now? So maybe we can try to play these, but think about a different phrase. Let's try that. 1 in, 2 and 1, 2, 3, 4. Why are you singing? Once more, 3, 4. Why are you singing now? I hope that is giving you an idea of how phrases can actually work if we just change the meaning of what we're trying to say and we connect the notes a little differently. And for example, I like this one. This is mysterious. Mysterious might even make us think about something darker, something warmer, something hidden. So it's not like I love Guitoberfest. Maybe it's something a little darker, and it will change our idea on how to realize this phrase. So why don't we play these mysterious? And maybe we can even play piano because it's mysterious. Let's try. 1, 2, 3, 4. The mysterious. One more time. 3 and 4 and. Very nice. The last one, this sounds a little silly, but actually what I tried to do is to connect, have a beginning of a word with 2 syllables. So we have to connect these long notes. So far we have the touch. It's like I love, Y, R, these is, but now we have oceans. So we have to try to really connect these 2 notes at the beginning. Can we try to do that together? So the phrase this time is oceans, relax my soul. Let's try. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oceans, relax my soul. One more time. 3 and 4 and oceans. Great. I told you this was going to be a little bit of a silly activity, but I think that if you start approaching your phrases in a different way, it actually helps, even if you're in your duo playing, because thinking about the phrases in a more vocal way, it helps to match better the articulation with your partner. You know, when you work with flutists, for example, they have a lot of what we could call phrases. Like in Italian, we call them phrases slurs. So basically not slurs that are meant to be guitar hammer-on pull-ups, but slurs that are just connectors. Like they mean connect these notes together. So they do have slurs and ties, but actually they also have these longer ties that connect phrases. These longer symbols like that connect phrases. And for example, here, what I wanted to show you is like a super simple scale, right? Super simple, A, B, C, D, E. We can play it in different ways and it will sound different. We can connect the whole line, or we can connect, like in the second example, A, B, C, D, and it will sound different. Or we can connect A, B, C, D, and that means that in between, we need to take a break a little bit, or to detach our fingers so we can make it clear that we want to phrase it that way. So why don't we try that together? So you play, I play a little accompaniment, which is so simple, but let's play together this first part twice, and then the second, and then the third, and then I want you to think about how it sounds with these different articulations. So the first, all connected together, try to make it as legato as possible from the A to the E. This is the speed that we're going to go. 1, 2, 3, 4. A, B, C, D. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4. I bet it sounded beautiful for you. I heard just myself. Why don't we try this second one, which is A, B, C, D, E. 1, 2, 3, 4. Da, 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 da. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the last but not least is going to be A, B, C, D, E. This is unusual, but it happens. It could happen if we want to create a little suspended moment there. Da, 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 da. Together, that it's another phrase that we can consider. So it sounds like this. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Da, 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 da. Great. You go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice. So this is just a little example of what we can do while working together with a partner, and we try to develop a sense of phrasing together, because that's one of the hardest things to do. And I think it's very, very useful to start thinking about the guitar if it wasn't a guitar and start to take some ideas from the vocal experience or other instruments as well. And it's very important to mark your phrases, to decide what to do together and try them out, try different possibilities and try to be together. And if you need really to put some silly phrases on it to make your phrasing idea more clear in your head, do it. Really, nobody's gonna hear that phrase while you perform. So, but it might be great, like a fun thing to work on, especially to create different characters, to give different characters to your music and try out different possibilities and articulations that you might not even think about. So that was the little silly part. Let's get more serious now. Dave, I'll ask you to come back with me now, because we will tackle on to our last but not least topic.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Those were fantastic. I love those exercises. So yeah, like Nikki said, this is a little bit of the more serious element of the conversation. We've given you some practical advice and tips. This is a little bit more conceptual, but I'd like to talk just briefly about the social nature, which I already hinted at a little bit, but the social nature of playing in ensemble with another person together, or persons. We're focusing on duos here, but this applies to other ensemble playing as well. As classical guitarists, we don't often have that much exposure to playing with other people. We're so used to practicing in our solo practice rooms, and when we perform, we often play as soloists. And we don't have a lot of experience playing with other people for that reason. And I think it has certain results that come from that fact. So, for instance, we tend not to have very solid rhythm like other musicians do, because we don't play with other musicians often enough to know when we're off rhythmically. So that metronome practice is so important. We also don't play in orchestra settings or ensemble settings often enough to know how to perform dynamics with another person. We're so used to doing it ourselves on the fly. Maybe we can add some rubato here and change the rhythm, and if it wasn't pleasing to the audience, then who cares, you know? So, however, I think we develop habits as soloists, rhythmic habits, musical interpretive habits that kind of go out the window as soon as you sit down with another person who might have different ideas, or who plays differently from you, has different strengths than you do too. And it's really important that you think about this process as a cohesive unit, that you're in this together. So there is a bit of losing your individuality when you enter a duo or ensemble setting. It doesn't mean you completely lose it. For instance, we've heard a lot about the Assad duo tonight, and Sergio will tell you that his brother Odair can play those fast scales so much better than he can. Of course, Sergio is being humble; he can play very fast scales, but Odair has this ability to play very fast and very fluidly. So he has that strength in their duo, and Sergio intentionally writes parts to take advantage of that strength. So it's not that you lose your strengths or completely lose your individuality, but there's another aspect to that, right? The Assads, when I first saw them perform, I think it's 20 years ago at this point, in Chicago, Sergio was on the right from the audience perspective, and Odair was on the left. And Odair was looking to our left, and Sergio was looking to our right. And if you understood my directions there, that means they were looking away from one another the entire concert. I mean, I don't know that they looked at each other except to tune up between pieces. And it was amazing how in sync they were with one another. They thought like one unit. And so this is something that is not easy to learn. This kind of adjustment from the habit of playing as a soloist to a habit of being social and playing with another person. And so from the outset, we've given you all these tools that help you to be more in tune with one another, more in sync with your duo partner. But I think it's important that you both have that perspective, that adjustment as you come to your duo practice together. So I'll pass it back on to Nikki now.
Yeah, I really like that. I really second everything you said. And while we were chatting about this workshop, and it came to my mind that when I was younger and I was singing in choir, I remember the director saying to us, if you hear your voice, you're too loud. And that to me was so impressive. It's like, yeah, you're right. I need to be able to hear who's around me. And there it means that I am balanced in the ensemble, because what we often forget is that an ensemble is an entity itself. It's not about us. It's about more people, in this case, two people, but it could be more. What if it's a quartet? What if it's a quintet, and etc.? So that experience was really, really informative for me, and it really made me think about it, because then I focused on listening all of a sudden, and that makes much a better blend. Because if you hear a voice that stands above the others, the ensemble doesn't sound good anymore. That voice might be the most beautiful voice you've ever heard, but the ensemble doesn't sound good anymore. So that experience of listening and making sure you put yourself into the space of listening, it's very, very important. And sometimes you might have some ideas, but the other person doesn't. And you have to drop some of your ideas in order to create the perfect blend for the duo. So the listening experience is one of the most important ones in duo playing, and I guess is probably the most important, because if we don't allow ourselves to be in that space, the listening space, we might never get to the connection we want with our duo partner, because again, we're working with other people and the relationship is the most important part of it. You don't have to be friends if you don't want, but the relationship, a good relationship, working together is the most important thing. So I guess that what we wanted to say today, and we'll listen to something. We'll listen to something to wrap it up. But before we open up to maybe a few questions that might come up in the chat, if there are some burning questions that come up, what we really wanted to give you today is a set of tools that you can use and apply in your duo practice in order to have some active and concrete strategies that you can use so that they can improve your playing together, your sense of rhythm together, your sound together, building dynamics together. So all these technical skills. But the other part is like getting you to start thinking about what it means to play with somebody else, and that also ends up like bringing other skills together, which is listening, relationship, being able to not feel protagonist, but start to feel what the energy of the duo and go with it, go with that flow, and then make decisions together, and make sure you learn the strength of the people so that you can play with them instead of trying to do something that is not in the strength. So really recognizing what you're good at and use it and use it the best as you can. So there your duo sounds beautiful. Dave, do you have anything to add?
No, you summed it up so beautifully. I'm anxious to hear our video, which is by a duo that no one mentioned, I don't think, in the chat, but they're also one of my favorite duos, and many of you will know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, and while you're listening or watching this little video, it's short. It's short. Try to think about what we just said and all the little elements that we've been talking about in this past hour, and try to see if you recognize some of these aspects in their playing. And feel free to write in the chat what you feel, what you hear, what you see in their duo playing, and why they are a good duo, because they are. Dave, you have the video there. You can play it. Sorry, little juggling here. All right.
There are always ads, and I'm trying to skip that process. Okay. Let me make sure I've got this all set up, and then I can share my screen.
That is always the problem.
Okay. And share sound. Here we go. Oh, we need to hear.
I guess we're done here. There might be something going on here.
I'm not sure what it is.
That was not prepared.
Dave, just before you, when you click share screen, make sure it says share audio as well.
Okay,
there's a little box.
I did. I'm going to stop sharing and try it again, see if that works. It might be because I was already full screen. Yeah, it says share sound. One moment.
Yay, fantastic. So many good comments came in the chat here about so many good colors, for example, as a comment about their duo. Duo Agostino, actually, we didn't present it. We got you into the performance immediately. But yes, like there were a lot of great colors. This piece is beautiful, but they executed it beautifully, just going into finding the different voices that the guitar can have. So warm or other type of sounds and matching their dynamics together. That's what really is incredible. Then we got in the chat, how beautiful, nice, love that, beautiful. A lot of good comments, and also the sound blended well. Dave, like, what do you think about blending of sound? Because we didn't touch on that, but it might be something good to talk about really briefly about what it means to blend sound with another person.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about listening is key here. Knowing how your partner attacks the string, for instance, we all have different sounds that we make on the instrument. Your tasto might be slightly different from another person's. You also have to know the other person's instrument. I think Janet and Raf both play Smallmans, and there's a very similar kind of timbre to the sound itself. So when they make tone changes, there's a sonic quality that blends, which might not be the case between you and your duo partner, and you might have to make slight adjustments to the sound to make it blend in with the kind of instrument that your partner plays, or simply the way your partner attacks with the right hand. So some of those exercises we went through of listening while playing dynamics or articulation, or, and I would also add to that list, color, elements like rallentando or ritardando, holding back, rubato, also something we didn't discuss, something that is at play here. There's a lot of pushing and pulling of time, which I think is a part of the blend of sound, is synchronization. Making sure that you're together is such a big component of the sound gelling. But the other aspect, I think, is what you already mentioned, Nikki, which is making sure you're not too loud. And I think there was a comment here about if you are too loud or if your partner's too loud, what should you do? And ultimately, I think the onus is on the loud guitar or the person who plays very loudly to play a little softer, rather than the softer person to come up. Though there are times when that needs to happen as well. It depends on the context to an extent. But if you have a duo partner who has a very loud guitar, like this guitar that I play, it's so loud I have to play quieter when I play with other people because it shouts. And so, again, I think it's knowing your partner in lots of different ways, but especially the sound that your partner makes and being able to adjust on the fly.
Yes, I totally agree. And then again, try out these things, try out timbres together. Don't be afraid of doing that as an exercise. Instead of doing that with the piece, you can do that even in practice time. Just like Dave proposed, a scale with dynamics. Do that and try to match the dynamics. Maybe create harmonies to your scale, so you can even play like a scale but that feels like a duo. And but I want to connect to another really nice comment that came in that I really like to say a couple of words about it. An amazing amount of arm movement, feeling the dynamics. So the movement, it's also important. And in general, like in our guitar playing, movement is important, because we think we play with the fingers, but we play with the whole body. And sometimes we don't take care of the movement deeper. We don't take care of the movement from the shoulders, from the entire body, from the breathing experience. So moving, it's important. But another thing that comes while you play with the duo is also choreographing together. That's the part that you can add to your performance. So making sure that, for example, you have And one part is like also cueing the other ones. It's already part of the choreograph. Like Dave said before, you know, like when you have a fermata or something, you stop and then you start again together. You breathe, you move. You cannot just play. The other person does not get that. So you have to choreograph that a little bit. But you can choreograph further. For example, where you move, how you move, and start breathing together, start moving together. For example, fun things is like how we end together and we end with the same movement. And that's so catchy for the audience. It doesn't have anything to do with your actually how you play, but how you actually project the movement of your playing further to the audience. So that's another fun part to work on together, like the choreography. So let me see if there's did you see other important parts in the chat? I saw other good things.
Yeah, there was a question from Dave Reynolds about having a knowledgeable person listen to your duos playing to provide input and advice. Yes, I think that is, I mean, we all need listening buddies or performing buddies, I guess you could say, but someone who understands what you're doing, what you're going through, who can say, you guys weren't exactly in sync here, and tell you, because sometimes you might not notice, no matter how well you listen, sometimes you can't tell when your partner's doing something that you just don't notice it. But having an outside perspective can be really helpful, especially someone who's experienced in duo playing or in whatever ensemble you're doing. So that also goes to having a teacher sit in and listen. I think that's underrated. Sometimes we again, like I said before, we are soloists so often that we take pieces to, even duet pieces, to our solo lessons with our teacher, but bring your duet partner with you to your lesson if you have a teacher, and have them analyze what you guys are doing together. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that is beneficial.
Yes, totally. And having a third years, no, well, we have 2 years, so it would be like 6 years. It would be it's very important. You figure out things that you wouldn't think of. I'll just look at the last comment that came in, was about a person saying that listening to jazz musicians that said what helps with phrasing in a song or in a standard or something is to know the lyrics, learn the lyrics of the singer, or even if you probably don't work with the singer, but know the lyrics. So when you play them, when you play the solo, you and the improvisation, you take inspiration from that, and you know, like, and that is something that jazz musicians do mention a lot. For example, be able to sing your solos for phrasing. And I do agree so much, but it helps in general, even if you work with singers, it helps to know the lyrics because it helps your pace. But if you play a melody that has words to it, if you know the lyrics, there you go. Like the phrasing comes so much more naturally, because phrasing is easier to understand vocally than actually plucking an instrument. But I think we should wrap it up because we're right on the hour, and we need to pass it to Simon for the next part of this this beginning of Guitoberfest. Thank you everyone for being here with us and listening these tips about duos and duo practice and things like that. You can go on and write in the chat if you have more things, but now it's Simon's time. And he will talk to us about how to play more beautifully. Simon, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Just checking on a couple of little settings to make sure I appear. There it goes. All right. Well, thank you, Nikki and Dave. We'll give you your due applause when we get off of YouTube, and we can unmute everyone and give a round of applause. is my new toy. I really wanted to use the whiteboard, so that's why we can use the whiteboard today. Hello, everyone on YouTube. Thank you, everyone at the Academy. Before I start, I did want to say, because it's probably the most public address I'll have in a while, thank you to everyone who's sent really kind, supportive messages over the last 6 months. I very much appreciate it, and it meant a lot. So everything's going really well. So yeah, thank you. What I wanted to talk about today, actually, a lot of this flows on very well from the presentation that Nikki and Dave just gave. And I sort of, the title is a little intentional in it's not cheesy, but it's a bit loaded. Like, what does it mean to play beautifully? I think that we often use it, but what does it actually mean? I think beauty, by definition, is something that's aesthetically pleasing. And in visual senses, I think we can tap into the fact we have symmetry and proportion and balance. But what does it actually mean in a musical sense? I think some things can be, the same kind of aesthetic appeal, like tone. A beautiful sound can be subjectively pleasing. So that fits into that same realm. But I think there's another element in music that has to do with a shared language. And that shared language can be cultural. So I think with Western classical music, it shares within a large culture. But I think there's also some things that can be quite universal, and like rhythm. Rhythm is something that we all share on a really foundational level, just as humans, just from being in our mother's wombs and hearing the heartbeat. I think that imbues us with a sense of rhythm, or a feeling for it, an appreciation for it. There's a really wonderful lecture by Leonard Bernstein from the Norton Lectures at Harvard University in the 70s. There's some great outfits in that lecture if you care to watch it. It's about 6 hours long, but he argues in that lecture about the cause for tonal music. He argues for tonal music, and the argument is based off of these natural intervals that we experience as humans. Anyway, so there's certain things I think we share as a common language as humans, and then there's also cultural shared language as well. And part of the beauty when we play our music is that shared language. It's things that we experience and lock into, and there's that element of communication between one person playing music and one person listening music. And that's an element we do need to consider when we're playing music and considering what makes it beautiful, what am I trying to share, and how is this communicated? So I have these points, and they get increasingly more challenging to execute as a musician. So let's start with number one, and I'm excited to use my whiteboard. Although apparently whiteboards do not have spell checkers, so I'm concerned about that. Rhythm. Now, rhythm, we talked about this a little bit Nikki and Dave talked about it in the duo presentation. And as classical guitarists, we do have to make an extra effort to work on our rhythm because, as they said, we do not get to play in ensemble settings as much as other musicians might, and we're left to our own devices to be rhythmic. But rhythm is such a powerful communication aspect of music. It makes such an impact, and it lays the foundation for absolutely everything else we do. All of the pitch and all the nuance, all the phrasing and the legato and everything else, it really needs that rhythm as a foundation. So it's worth making that extra effort as a classical guitarist to improve our rhythm. Now, one thing is to learn the concept of the rhythms and the durations. One thing is to play with a metronome and try and line up like that. But I think if we start counting and feeling the music, that is where we really start to make it part of us. And you notice that as a listener. They talk about being in a groove or sitting in the pocket, and that's where we start to feel the rhythm really sitting right where we want it to. So counting, I'm a big advocate of this, and this is probably the first mention of this, but there's a big revision of the curriculum coming, and ensemble music and also counting in the early stages is heavily integrated. So counting is nice because we involve our breath, and without, we can't help but also involve our body. So just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You can do it with me. It seems easy, but it's not as easy as we might think when we're playing the guitar. So 2, 3, 4. 1, you can use your body. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can bob your head like you're conducting. You can move your arms like you're conducting. You can breathe in at certain points. But to sit in that groove and have that pulse is foundational for what we do. So counting simply 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is for 4/4 counts. It obviously would be different for 3/4 or 6/8, what have you. But just that sense of counting and counting while you play is a huge tool that improves our rhythmic ability. Doing it with clapping is where I would start in terms of adding a layer of difficulty. 1, 2, I'm bobbing as well. I'm moving, counting, clapping, all of these, a lot of synchronization going on. And so it's no wonder that when we start integrating the guitar and playing notes along with those counts as we're saying them, that's actually several layers of challenge there. You've got the count, you've got the verbalization, the actual, you're counting out loud, and you've also got playing as well, the mechanics. So there's 3 layers there to deal with. That's why it's so important to just work on a simple count. And I used to do this a lot when I lived in Harlem. I used to walk up and down Central Park West. It's a lovely walk. There's no crossings on the park side. So I would just walk and I would count a lot. And because I'm really not that rhythmic as a musician, I had to work very hard at it. And I would often tap rhythms as well. I'd try and work on a rhythm that I was struggling with at the time. So I encourage you to bring that into your musical life a bit more, even if it seems a little simple. Not to belabor the point, but I encountered an incredibly rhythmic guitarist when I was recording an album with a bluegrass band. And that guitarist, some of you know, is Colin Davin. And the difference between just counting and going, yeah, I can count to 4, that's easy, or I can count and walk. And the difference between that and lining up right with a click track is huge when it comes down to trying to line things up. And you only really encounter that in ensemble playing or recording and trying to line up with click tracks. So this, while simple, is also incredibly difficult to try and clap exactly in time for minutes at a time. It's a huge challenge. So counting and the feel that comes with that, the physicalization of that. Now the next step from there is subdivision. Now subdivision, if you don't know what it is going to be a revelation, because it really helps to break down rhythms, understand them, and also execute them. So simply put, if we had our 1, 2, 3, 4, our quarter notes, right? That's what we were counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. To subdivide, we're simply breaking that down into smaller components. So the next division would be an 8th note. So we're counting twice as fast. And we would count them as and. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Let's just do it. Let's just do it a little bit. Ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And you can clap different rhythms. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And sitting in the pocket with that subdivision is going to give you even more information to shore up that rhythm, to get it lining up exactly where we need it to go. The next subdivision, which is very useful, it takes a long time to write on a whiteboard, is 16th notes. Right, so now we've just gone down one layer again. Okay, so we count these 1 E and 2 E and etc. 3 E and 4 E and. Let's count that together just to get the feel for it. See if you can bring in a little bit of bob in your body and get a groove going. So ready? 1, 2, 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 and 3 E and 4 E and he's got to breathe in there sometimes too. That's challenging. Now, all of this helps us do something. So this is called subdivision. We'll just do sub for short. All of this is going to help us do something which I came across a percussionist use this term, and I love it, tuning. Now, we often think about tuning is in pitch, and there's something slightly more sharp, we need slightly more flat, something like that. But we can do it with rhythm as well. And the example, the challenge for now, I hope we can still see the bottom of this, is this rhythm. Bum, 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 the dotted rhythm. Because this rhythm here is a very powerful rhythm. It has a lot of energy to it, a lot of impetus. This is up. It has that dot and that 16th note make a really particular rhythm that gives the music a certain character. And Nikki, Dave, and I were talking about this about exams recently. Something we've seen very commonly is that this rhythm turns into this, right? It's a triplet, and that sounds like this. Boom, boom, boom. Riding the horse. And of course, this is our rhythm, and it's great for the blues feel, the shuffle, and we sometimes have triplets, but it's not the same as this. So an example of a challenge to use subdivision to tune your rhythm is to be able to go very distinctly between these two rhythms. And that's a real challenge. So what we do here is we'd subdivide one E and A, right? And the first note would be clapped on the beat, the one, and then the last one is on the A. So if we were to clap the rhythm and count the subdivisions, it would sound like this. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A, 3 E and A, 4 E and A. This has the same beat, however, they're divided into 3. And we'd count that 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and Now here's the challenge. Maybe we can't go through it a lot right now. I have to move on to tone. But can you do a distinct difference between 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1? That's it. Sorry. Back to It's very subtle. And that's what we're talking about with that tuning, where it's the difference between landing it right here and landing it just over here, which is what happens with the triplet there, is very subtle, but it musically sounds very different. So all of this ties back to the rhythmic universal language of rhythm being something that impacts the beautiful perception of the music that we play. So here we go. I'm going to rub it all off. I don't know why, but I remember being in school, and even though this takes much more time than flipping a slide on a computer screen, I find it very compelling when people write on boards. I don't know why. So I hope it's not too old school for you, but I enjoy it. Okay, so the next one is tone. Now this is in the world, as we said, of perhaps more aesthetically pleasing, a bit more something we can equate a bit more to visual beauty as well. But tone, when we're thinking about developing it, I think it's important to divvy it up into 3 parts. We've got the quality of the tone, we've got the consistency, spell check, and then if we had enough room, if I knew how to use whiteboard correctly, we would also have the variety. I'll put that in as an abbreviation because I ran out of space. So the quality of tone is where we start. And then that's where we sort of travel across in terms of our development. Quality, again, gets broken up into 4 parts, right? The first part is the nail shape. That's what's going to affect probably the most impactful thing. Also, if you don't use nails, that's going to impact the tone as well. The next thing that's going to impact it is the nail texture. The third impactful thing in terms of quality of tone is going to be point of contact. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the last is going to be the movement of the fingers through the string. So all of this in order, the nail shape, the shaping we have of the nail, the texture of that nail, the point of contact and how the finger moves that nail through the string. So we usually have, it's gonna be interesting, we have 3 general nail shapes. One might be one that more or less follows the contour of the finger flesh. The next one might be kind of a flat, more of a flat top one. And then the last one, which I think became really well known after Scott Tennant's Pumping Nylon, and that's a little bit out there, but we'll take it. That is the ramped shape of a nail. So all of these are going to create a different sound, and they will suit different people with different finger shapes, different nail types. It's worth experimenting to find the one that you like. I tend to use this broad, flat top. It gives a really forgiving area of which to make contact on the string. So the next point is the nail texture, and simply put, that is the edge of the nail. So if you rub your thumb, the side of your thumbnail along the side of your index nail, you'll feel a certain texture. It should feel glassy and smooth. This is a either or situation. You want to buff that with some very fine sandpaper or those microfiber pads, and that will really change the quality of your sound. The next one is the point of contact. And that, people often ask, where exactly do we make the point of contact? It's going to differ from person to person. It's usually, in a general sense, it's going to be where the flesh meets the nail, so around that point. But you will find that it changes. You might have it further up the nail. You might have it more in the middle of the nail. Sometimes if you practice a lot, you'll actually find there's a bit of a groove created in the nail, and you can see exactly where you're making a point of contact. And then the movement of the finger through the string is obviously going to impact that whole thing. And for those in the academy, going into the lessons of free stroke and rest stroke are better places than me talking on a whiteboard about that movement. But those are the things that impact the quality of the sound. Now, once we've done that, and that here, this is really the process of experimentation, because your finger, no one can give a specific shape, nail shape, point of contact movement for you. You have to figure that out. It's a joy of the process. It can be also a frustration of the process, but you have to experiment. And the simplest way, I think, is really doing some pretty drastic movements with your wrists and getting different approaches, trying different shapes. And every now and then you need to be listening, and you'll find a sound that you go, that is a beautiful sound, right? They're in there for sure. And then the next step is consistency. Consistency is all about the development of that right hand position. That's why in the early stages, we try and keep it quite stable. And we want to develop a position and a point of contact and a movement that allows us to repeat that sound that we found that we like over and over again, so that it can serve the music. So we can get out of the way with our technique and just let the music shine. And then after all that work is done to get a nice consistent sound, then we'll look at varying that sound. So we've got not only our sort of normal sound, but we might use different types of stroke, rest stroke, top stroke. We might go ponticello, we might go tasta, we might go loud and soft, bright and dark. And all of those variants go through the same process. You're exploring different points of contact, different types of movement. And so you can see that there's actually a lot of work, ongoing work, years, decades. And it's one of those journeys that you have to embrace, as opposed to wanting to just get a beautiful sound immediately. I think the journey is really important there. So tone is something that is going to impact the beauty of your playing. All right, legato is an interesting one, because again, we can think of it in a couple of different ways. And I will thank one Nicoletta Tedesco for helping with this conceptual idea of legato. So legato means connected. Its antonym is staccato, so detached. And we have two different approaches we can think about this. We have a technical approach and we have a musical approach. Technical is what we're talking about, is where we have a note and we make a sound, right? And then the next note, we make a sound. There is always going to be a small moment that breaks that sound. That's where Your fingers move between notes. That's where the right hand touches the string. It's going to be a tiny little break in the sound. We don't create the sound the same way a woodwind player might or a singer. However, we can aim to get those sounds as connected as possible. That's where we work on the consistency and speed of our right hand movement. That's where we work on the synchronization of our left hand movement. If we don't have those things in order, the sound gets cut. And that's where we lose our legato connection between the notes. So this can be caused, like I said, by a right hand technique where we maybe are preparing our finger on the string early ahead of time. Sometimes you want to do that, but sometimes you don't. And you might not know you're doing it. That cuts the sound. The other one happens if your left hand lifts up early from a note. That's going to cut that sound. And then we have the element of synchronization between the two. So working on legato is something that is pretty important for classical guitar because it doesn't come naturally in our playing. For a woodwind player or a singer, that does come a lot more naturally. You can connect notes. But on guitar, we're always striving to make them as connected as possible. So that's the technical element of legato. Now, the musical element of legato has more to do with an oral connection or a conceptual connection between notes. So there's a couple ways we could think about this. If we have 4 notes, we can play them the same way. You know, maybe we'd be practicing technique and we could try and play these notes the same way. And that would be connecting those notes. The continuity of that, the consistency of that connects those musical notes. If, however, we don't have that consistency of execution back in our tone world, then we might get something that looks a bit more like this, right? So this note is louder, this note's softer, loud again. That divides up the music and we lose the connection, the oral connection between those notes because they're being played differently. So this might be an accent and this might be piano, etc. So we need to work on our tone to get that consistency of legato. Another way to think of musical legato, though, is to do with how we join the notes together, because we don't always want to play them the same way every single time. They're constantly moving in relationship to one another. So a good example is a note that we play. Now, when we play a note on the guitar, the decay is pretty instantaneous. The sound dissipates very quickly, right? Now, if we play another note here at the same volume, this decay has been sort of disregarded. And so we might get, it's not an accent, but it doesn't really relate so much to any, the way the previous note is played. If we play it louder, that might be a special effect, but that's also a disconnecting aspect. However, there's also the idea of playing it with consideration to how all the notes around it have been flowing. I mean, this may not be just one note. There might be several rows of notes that take this arc. But let me give you a little example on the guitar of what I'm talking about. So if we had 4 notes, there they are, 4 even notes. Now, if we had a note that suddenly got louder, again, you might be using it on purpose for a special effect, but it sticks out. It's sort of, you start losing some of the line. Right? Now, if we were to play it, considering where the decay goes, or an arc of sound, suddenly the music has direction. Or in the case of a single note, these notes start relating in a much more connected way in a musical sense. Now, I'm going to continue on with this same idea, talking about suspensions. Nikki, how am I doing on time? I haven't got a clock anywhere.
You're doing great. It's
what time is it?
You're 5:54, so you're 25 minutes in.
No problem. Great. Okay, I'll take it relax. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, so next up is suspensions. Now, this makes a nice connection from that idea of following the arc of a particular note in terms of its decay. And I think this is the most odd one out in our list of aspects that make something beautiful, because it's very specific. But it's so common and so useful, so expressive, that I think it's really worth talking about. And it also plays into legato, but it plays into phrasing as well. So that's why it's here. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and lead into this idea, okay? So I'm going to start on a slight tangent. I'm going to teach you a very common cadence. I find myself using this in some of the CGC shows, but I don't think I've ever really explained it. Okay, so I'm going to write out a cadence. We're in the key of C. Okay, next up would be, yep. And then following that, okay. So I'll play this for you once, then I'll just tell you a little bit about it. I wonder if you've heard this before. It's very familiar, very common, sorry. This is, in the key of C major, we're ending on C here, so that's going to be the 1 chord. This is G, B, D, that's the 5 chord. And here we have C, E, G, but we have G in the bass, so it's called an inversion, and it's the second inversion. There's something called figured bass, which is simply a sort of a shorthand to tell us about inversions and positions of these chords. So second inversion is 6/4, root position is 5/3. So we have 1-5-1. This is a perfect cadence going from 5 to 1. Very resolute cadence movement of harmony in classical music. Now, the interesting thing about this, and this comes up quite a lot in music, is that the G, the bass note here, while this is a C chord, that G anchors the harmony so heavily, so prominently. Harmonically, the bass is always going to be the most impactful. So perhaps you've heard something like that kind of movement. That G, even though it has the C harmony above it, is so impactful, we're going to call it a 5 anyway. Yoink. So we're really considering this a big 5-1, right? 5-1. And the shorthand for this is calling it this 5-6-4-5-3 progression. So we've got this movement up the top where we've got the C goes down to the B and the E goes down to the D. So it's like the G major harmony, that 5 chord is coming, but we're not quite there yet, and it creates a little bit of anticipation in a way. We've got the bass is already there, but these other parts still have yet to move there. So it's a really common progression that you might start identifying in some of your pieces. Now, we can make this more expressive. What we're going to do is we're going to take this note here, this C, which belongs in the triad, C, E, G, G, C major, it belongs there. We're going to remove this B, which belongs in the G major triad, and we're going to suspend that C over the next chord. It does not belong in that triad. G, B, D are the notes that belong in that G major triad. C does not belong. We're going to suspend it across. But of course, we want to resolve that suspension. That tension comes to resolution, and then we will resolve it down to B. That does belong in that chord. And that, in short, is how we talk about a suspension. We have the suspension here, we have the resolution, but we also have the preparation. So preparation, suspension, and resolution. So the initial harmony sounded like this. Now what we're doing is taking this first note and suspending it over the next chord, letting it resolve down, and then coming down to 1. Now, so that's the function of the suspension. That's also the definition of the little moments that happen within it. Now, how it ties back to legato is that we need to listen to the path of that suspended note and resolve it downwards without doing this. If we play that B loudly, it doesn't really carry the expressive weight of the suspension. If we know that a suspension is happening, it's a little easier to make sure we resolve that note. But the first part is knowing that it's actually happening. We can hear it, we can also identify it in the music. What we need to do on a technical level is to resolve it quietly, because we've got dissonance or a tension in the music and then a resolution to it. Tension, there's that resolution. Adding a roll on this chord is another way. It's an ornamentation of the chord to enhance the tension. Relax. Now, it's really one of those things that I think speaks in our cultural musical language. Now, if you execute a suspension really well with legato and also following the decay of the note, then we get a new expressive moment that can make music more beautiful. So that's the suspension. That's how it ties in with legato technique. Now, suspensions are what we might call, I don't know, a cell. It's just a small little moment, right? That occurs in music quite often, and we can use it as a very small musical moment, but it's not a full musical idea. But the same way that we can think of suspension as something we understand and we have a way that we treat the music there, we can bring that same idea across to phrasing. So a phrase by definition is something that can stand alone as its own musical idea. It can be made up of cells and motifs and figures and things, but it's a bit of a larger musical element. And it can vary in size, but I think the binding factor is that it's a musical idea unto itself that makes sense unto itself. And I think it's a little bit of an abstract concept to say, how do we phrase the music? How do we incorporate the phrasing in the music? Well, part of it is understanding the elements of the music that tie together, that make an idea. And there are common ones, and I'll give you an example that is common. We've seen this before in the Academy, but it's just a really good example. But if we take the time to identify what notes relate to one another in a broader idea, that then arms us with the ability to connect that through legato, through tone, making sure that the rhythm stays, the pulse stays within that phrase. So while we had a little cell with the suspension, a phrase might be a longer idea. We don't often see the markings, a phrase marking, in classical guitar music. You'll often see it in violin or piano music, but not so often in classical guitar, to be honest. We can have large phrases. We can also have subphrase. We can divide them up into two parts. It's often called question and answer. So we talk about one big phrase, it might be 16 measures. Question and answer might be 8 measures each. And then we can also divide that sometimes into even smaller subphrases. And so the example that's kind of equivalent to the suspension idea, where we can see, oh, I know that shape, I know that phrasing, is the sentence structure. So let's say this is G, A, B, A, B. I probably should have written this as staff. That's all right. I have an imaginary staff. I think we'll get the idea. You know what? It's a whiteboard. I'm going to do this again. It doesn't really make sense. Okay. All right, so we're going to have G, A, B, C. We'll do it in 3/4. B, C, A, F sharp, G. All right, yeah. I'll play this for you. It's a really basic little idea. phrase, we have 4 measures. We have an idea in the beginning. That's where we get that first little subphrase. We have an idea very similar in the second measure. It's the same idea, it's just an ascending little scale figure, and they kind of relate to each other. And then we have an idea at the end, which is twice as long. This is called sentential structure. It's a name given to this very common grouping that happens in Western classical music in the common practice period, and it was so titled by Arnold Schoenberg. And we get short, short, long, right? And the proportions are very balanced, often in classical music, very symmetrical. So A, A1, and B. Or we could divide it into a group of 2 with question and answer. So the first step is going to be to identify these. Then we get the opportunity to then sort of increase this beauty of this moment. So how can we draw the listener's attention to the fact that certain things relate and certain things are grouped together? Well, maybe a better way of asking is, how can we break this up? How can we not phrase it together? Well, similar to legato, we could, we've decided that the groupings are like this: short, short, long, right? Now, if we accented notes that were in slightly odd places, let's say we accented this note and we accented this note, that's going to break things up. That's going to make things sound a little disconnected. Right? This is where I often, I don't know if this is rude or not, but I often say this is kind of Christopher Walken territory. Christopher Walken has a very particular way of speaking his lines in movies, which are compelling because they're distinct. But this breaks up the musical idea. And I'm not suggesting that you would, in a piece of music, decide to do that. But this happens, this kind of accenting happens when we don't have the technique to execute it and to rely on. If consistency of tone is not there, if the legato is disturbed by accents or disconnects, that's when we get these things happening, and it breaks up the music, it breaks up the ideas. It's very hard, honestly, to tell if you're doing it or not. That's where someone listening or a teacher giving advice is really helpful to say, I think we need to group these together more successfully. So those are the kind of things that break up a phrase, right? But what brings it together? Well, you could use those accents to further define the groupings. If you went ya-da-dum, ba-da-dum, da-dee-da-da-dum, that's actually helping to outline the phrasing structure. So that's one way. You could also add articulation. If we've got these 2 ideas that are very similar, you could add a staccato note here and here. Da-da-bum, ba-da-bum, da-dee-da-da-dum. You could help draw that together because they're similar, and we're actually enhancing the similarity by using repeated articulation. And then, of course, there's things like dynamics. You can have crescendo, sort of a hairpin crescendo. Ya-da-dee-da-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-dum. Or we could have tempo rubato, where we speed up into the phrase and we slow down out of the phrase. These are all things that help the music gel together. And essentially what we want to do is, like in speech, we want to communicate very clearly and immediately upon first listening for someone that's listening to us play that these notes say something together. They relate to one another. And it's a craft. I think one of the elements of this kind of musical skill does get acquired by osmosis to a certain degree. So the more listening you do, not just to classical guitar music, the more listening you do to opera singers, the more listening you do to, it doesn't have to be classical, like great musicians in the pop world, like Paul Simon, or people who really can create great melodies and bind them together. Listen to how they do that. What's going on in the way they perform? Do a lot of broad listening and consider phrasing. The best even is to have music in front of you as you listen. All right, so you can see how these elements of making music more beautiful are getting more complex, right? And we need to rely on our foundations to be able to execute these things. And the last one is voicing. Now, voicing being probably the most challenging thing here. Oops, that's not how you spell voicing. This really harks back to probably why you fell in love with classical guitar in the first place. Voicing is this idea that we have sometimes, we'll have a melody, beautiful flowing melody. And then we might have a bass line. Bass lines are a bit more angular, so we'll be a bit more angular with our little depiction here. And then if we're really lucky, we will have some inner voices. And on classical guitar, it's very hard to sustain 3 voices continuously, so they might be a little intermittent. That's quite compelling. That's often why we fall in love with the guitar, because we hear this little trio of voices happening all in one left hand. It's pretty spectacular. The challenge of voicing is to not do this. So this is the same idea, but it's all in blue. It's all one color. We don't hear the different voices. We don't hear the interaction between those voices, the contrast, the contrapuntal movement. And this is the challenge, to bring that all alive, because you need to do phrasing and legato and tone and rhythm all at the same time in multiple voices. So all of these challenges we've talked about is compounded. Articulations, expression, yet controlling that. The way we're going to be doing that is first, obviously, understanding what notes relate to one another in different voices. So not only phrasing as a whole, but phrasing within the different voices. And then the ability to execute that technically in our right hand and our left hand. Usually in the left hand, it's got to do with how long we can hold down notes, finger independence. And in the right hand, it has to do with independence of the fingers. So we can bring out some notes louder, some notes softer, to create this beautiful world. This is very abstract art they've created. So I would say there are other elements for sure. Maybe once we get into our break, we can talk about the other elements that make music beautiful, because this is not a definitive list. It's just the points I wanted to talk about. But number 7 here has a question mark. And I guess I wanted to point out through all of this discussion, these are the things I think that make music really compelling, beautiful, expressive, tools that we can develop and work on. And throughout all of this, I never mentioned the idea of mistakes. Yet, I think many of us put our spotlight on mistakes first and foremost. As in, if I play a performance and I made a mistake or two, if a pitch is incorrect or what have you, or there's a memory slip, that's a mistake. And that really, we can get very fixated on these mistakes. But I don't think it really diminishes the beauty of the music. I think all of this, if this was all present in your performance, if you'd considered, you worked on the rhythm, the tone was consistent and varied, the legato was, you're aware of the connection of the notes, you treated the suspensions well, the phrasing was accurate, and the voicing was developed. I mean, who's paying attention to a blip here or there? All of this is where the beauty comes from. And mistakes, they really don't impact the listener's experience. And counterintuitively, I think if we do focus on all of this, far less likely to make any kind of mistakes, because if you've worked on all of this, you've done quite a deep amount of work that then means you're very prepared. And the more prepared you are, the less sort of mistakes you make. But I just wanted to make a mention of that, because we get a little fixated on mistakes, whereas I think our focus might be more well-placed on some of these musical elements. So that is the end of my little whiteboard presentation. Thank you, Mr. Whiteboard. Give me a second, I'm gonna bop back over to the computer and we can talk about it. Thank you everyone who's been watching on YouTube. We're gonna stop the stream in just a moment. And we're gonna continue on this weekend with Guitoberfest. So give me 2 seconds and I will just appear back at the computer. Thanks everyone.